I thought they were really unwell, and I kept going back to the doctor, and they kept telling me it was fine, but I knew that something was wrong.
Welcome back to another episode of HPG Engage The Podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Grace Larson. How are you today, Grace?
I'm really well, thanks, Dwayne. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much for sitting down with me. So just to introduce Grace to everyone, Grace is a director of her own company called PEDS. She's a clinical nurse specialist, and she's also a senior nurse educator for Medcast. And with that, she also helps to develop pediatric content for Medcast as well. That's a lot there. You seem to be a busy woman with it.
It does sound like a lot when you say it like that. Yeah.
It does. I was reading it earlier.
Send it back to me.
I was reading it earlier and I was thinking, how has she got time to sit down with us today? But you do.
Maybe that's why I'm in my car. Yeah.
Yes. Just fitted it into that busy schedule. But But first of all, that's quite a list of things that you're doing there, and it all seems to fall under one umbrella of pediatrics. But let's take it all the way back. Let's go back to the beginning of your career and your background. What actually made you decide to finish in high school thinking I'm going to go and study to be a nurse?
Yeah, well, look, I suppose if we go all the way back, I actually was not going to become a nurse leaving high school. My mum was a nurse, and so I think you sometimes just automatically rule things out, you know, when your parents do certain professions sometimes. But I had an experience when I was working in my job that I was doing alongside attending high school, where I had a colleague experience a chemical burn in her eye, and I helped her manage that. And I think I realised in that moment all of these sort of skills that I'd sort of developed through osmosis, probably from my mum, and that I felt like helping somebody in that moment when they were really quite afraid, and when something had happened to them, I realized I had like these skills that were really important, and I felt really satisfied at the end of it. Like, you know, I really could help her, and I made her feel reassured, and it made me realize that I probably was a pretty good candidate to then go on and do nursing. So I applied to do nursing, and I went into my undergraduate actually thinking that maybe I would follow the psych pathway and become a psych nurse, but obviously that's not where I ended up.
It's definitely not where you ended up. And in terms of that experience where you helped out the colleague with that burn, was it then that moment that you kind of decided, or were there other instances throughout life leading up to the point of making the decision that you thought, okay, maybe this is for me?
No, I actually really feel like that was my pivotal moment, like, interestingly.
Oh, nice.
I think that I hadn't really even entertained the thought of nursing prior to that point. So, I hadn't really ever envisaged myself in that role. So I think it was very much like that exact moment that afterwards I sort of came away, and, you know, I was actually in year 12. I'd aligned all of my subjects up to go on and study psychology, actually. So it was in that moment where I was like, oh, hold on a second, maybe I'll explore nursing and see, you know, whether that's something that I want to do. And, you know, because my mum was a nurse and she used to manage a aged care unit, like our school holidays were spent with her in that unit. You know, like I would help, you know, feed the residents their breakfast, lunch and dinner. I would have a chat with them. I'd hear their stories. And so it probably was like underneath it all, I had a lot of like these experiences, which meant that when I had this one situation happen to me, it was sort of like, oh, aha, yeah, that makes sense. Why don't we go into this career? So, yeah.
Amazing. And then what was your experience like studying to be a nurse at university?
Yeah, well, as I said, like I was going to do psych nursing because I suppose I'd set myself up, you know, to do psychology. So it sort of made sense. Oh, you know, maybe I'll get into this area, and then I'm marrying up those two interests. But yeah, it was really interesting for me. Like when I went and did my rotation in psych, I actually realised that I found it really difficult and was unlikely to probably be able to do that career like in that area like very long term. I could see that I would probably burn out in that area very quickly. So I wasn't really quite sure what I would do. And so I just was sort of going along and, going to all my rotations, going to the medical wards and the surgical wards and going, yeah, this is okay. Yeah, I enjoy this. I like the structure of nursing. I like the time, management side of it. I like being busy. We've sort of maybe already identified.
Makes sense.
So I was sort of like, oh, I'm sure I'll figure out where I want to go. You grad year, you go through rotations, I'm sure I'll figure it out. But actually in my last year of nursing, someone pulled out of their paediatric rotation. And I did my last year actually at a rural hospital. So they, at the last minute, said, hey, can you go and do your last 6 months in the paediatric ward, please? And I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. But yeah, sure, I'll go to peds. Yeah, why not? And I just found my home. Like I was like, I just was like, this is wonderful. I really love this. And again, I don't know why I hadn't thought about that because, I've always really enjoyed working with children. So again, it was like a bit of an aha moment for me. Oh, this is actually something that I really enjoy doing within that scope of nursing. So yeah, I decided to stay on in the paediatric ward within my graduate year and, obviously develop that a bit further. So yeah. It was good. It really, those rotations really helped me find my place, I think. Yeah.
And I guess that's a part of the whole experience when you are going through nursing school. It is to put you in different positions and different experiences so you can then make a better decision when you're graduating of what you actually kind of want to specialize in. Obviously yours seems to have just fallen to more of a serendipity. It's just by chance.
Seem that way, doesn't it?
Yeah, just by chance that your last 6 months this person wasn't there and they're like, okay, you're just gonna stay here for 6 months, and you turn out to love it. And it's crazy to think that maybe if you didn't get those 6 months, how your life could have been different.
Oh, totally.
From a career standpoint. You may not have as we will talk about later on in the podcast about your business, that may not have even been a thought in your mind because you wouldn't have been seeing firsthand the problem that you're now fixing. So once you graduated and you then started working in the children's hospital, what was, I guess, the experience there like for you? And then also, I guess, touching on your career progression through nursing as just, I guess, a registered nurse and then being promoted into education roles and stuff like that.
Yeah. So again, look, I think probably, like, as you say, some of it's serendipitous and some of it's like, I think I'm the type of person that says yes to things a lot. Like when people give me suggestions like, hey, I was in this pediatric ward, in a small country town and, one of the nurses said, hey, why don't you go to Melbourne and work in the pediatric intensive care unit? And I was like, yeah, great idea. Let's go. Let's move to Melbourne. So that's sort of what I did.
Yeah.
I think that just by saying, like, being open to different experiences and open to different opportunities has actually given me the majority of my career growth. Like, so, the same sort of thing happened. Like, so I went to the intensive care and again, I found it was that next level of like career home for me. Like I found, again, like a lot of like complexity, a lot of challenge, using your brain, but also really caring for families and children at a really difficult time. And, I know that I'm somebody who has a lot of empathy and compassion, and I felt like I could really channel that like in this area really well to give, families a lot of support and children a lot of support through this really difficult, time in their lives when they're in intensive care. And I think, I'm just really passionate about doing it when I was there. So like I put a lot of, my heart and soul into my job. And I think that because of that, people offered and extended me, opportunities, so my first, I suppose, jump in my career after I got to the intensive care was when they actually were doing a mission to Vietnam where they were opening up a pediatric hospital doing congenital heart surgery, and they needed some people to come along and provide education to the nurses, and I got offered the chance to do that. And so, as I said, I say yes to things. So I was like, yes, that sounds like a wonderful opportunity. I've never done education before, but if you think that I'm capable of it, this was a senior colleague who taught the postgrad course, and I thought if she's offering this to me, then, I'm going to put myself in an uncomfortable position, but I'm sure that it'll be worthwhile, So we went over there with some really great clinicians, people that I really respected. And it just blew my mind, obviously, like going to a country which has such a different health system to Australia, for one. But I think it really made me realise, actually, I can do this. My first education experiences with people who don't speak the same language as me, and I've walked away with a positive experience. And so I'm gonna take the next opportunity that comes to me to follow that education pathway. So, when a position came up to be a clinical support nurse of in intensive care at the bedside for other nurses, I basically applied for that job, and then started my I suppose career through education from that point. I think it's been a lot of just being open to possibilities and saying yes to opportunities. And even though there might be that element of self-doubt going, can you do this? Are you do you have the ability to do this? I think trusting that if I give myself the opportunity to try at least, and then if I can't do it, then no, and then we can try something else. But
that's interesting, because that seems to be quite a recurrent theme when I speak to people for the podcast, whether it's within healthcare or even some of the consultants here. The one thing that they always say, because I always ask about career progression and why did you do what you did, they said a lot of the time it is about them just saying yes to things. And my mum's actually said to me so many times, if someone ever offers you a job and you're not sure if you can do it, say yes and then figure it out as you go. Because a lot of the times
it's literally what we're doing.
A lot of the times when you're offered the job, whoever's the senior person obviously thinks you can do it. They're not going to offer you the job if they don't think you can do it. So if you have that doubt, and obviously people know about imposter syndrome, so many people get it. It is about just saying yes, jumping in 2 feet, and then just seeing what happens, because 9 times out of 10 you do end up surprising yourself on your capabilities and what you actually do know, especially when you're put in a position where you probably have to think a little bit outside the box of what you would normally do in your current role, if that makes sense.
Yes. No, it absolutely does. I think you can't sort of grow and progress unless you challenge yourself. So,
exactly.
Sometimes, you are jumping into some shoes that you might feel are a little bit too big for you, but you're not going to ever learn how to fill them unless you start to develop those skills. So, I think you just have to be honest with yourself about that too, and to other people to say, I feel like I've got a really good grasp on this part of, this role, but in this area I don't, so what do I need to do to get on top of it, or get the exposure or the experience, or who do I need to partner with to progress myself in that area. So just being honest with yourself I suppose can help as well.
100%. And speaking of stepping out of your comfort zone, you've started your own business. You're director of PEDS. Obviously, you've been working in paediatrics. You've been working in Children's Hospital. But can you just give us an insight into what exactly this business is, and how are you affecting the healthcare ecosystem as well?
Yeah, of course. So look, I spent quite a bit of time in the intensive care, and I did a few different education roles and even some quality and safety ones. And then I had my children. So I've got 3 children. And then with each child, I took time off, which was maternity leave, and then went back. And so sort of, was in and out of motherhood and career at the same time. So, I suppose at that point, it's not that my career didn't grow, but it just sort of stayed where it was at. And that was fine. I was really happy with, doing that. But I suppose with my last child, who I had actually in the start of the first lockdown for COVID, and she's my 3rd child, what I sort of really realised with one of my other colleagues in that period of time is that access to that specialist paediatric knowledge is something that doesn't really get exported outside of children's hospitals very often or very easily. Originally we were sort of thinking mostly in the healthcare sector, so some of our smaller regional hospitals being able to have the access to, that more complicated pediatric knowledge and background. But eventually, we sort of began thinking, I suppose, beyond that to, our work in intensive care is very reactionary. We're looking after children who've already had accidents and whose disease process has already rendered them, in need of very advanced treatment. What about if we could take our skills and knowledge all the way back to the start of that, to the parents and the carers of children, to empower them with the knowledge and skills to know what to do and to prevent those things from happening, or if they do happen, responding appropriately and effectively, maybe we could prevent kids from even rocking up to hospital. Maybe we could, really make an imprint and a reduction in, the mortality rates of children. And I know that sounds like a really big, a big task, but I suppose, as I've sort of said, like, I think I've developed this, passion for aiming big, and then wherever I get to is going to be worthwhile. So the journey that we are on is going out and delivering a variety of different education to parents, to carers, to grandparents, to aunties and uncles, and with every single person that gets that education, there will be a ripple effect from that. So I feel like it still could be achievable.
It's almost a shoot for the stars, land on the moon kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Aim big, and if we get to the moon, that is more than we expected.
Exactly, it's more than we are now. And and I actually had someone say to me once, like, because I was like talking about this, and it actually was a medical colleague who was like, "So what? You want to improve the outcomes of all children?" And I was like, yes. Like every single child. And he's like, "That's not really achievable." And I was like, "Well, why not? Why isn't it achievable?" I think
exactly.
I think we can do it.
100%. If you have the belief that you can, then it will happen. And you're obviously quite a new business. So with time and consistency, you will get there. But in terms of, do you have an example of, I guess, a scenario that you probably have come across in the hospital where you thought this could have been prevented at home if they had known how to deal with this particular situation?
Yeah, there's a lot. And I think, and even, in the news, like I read news articles, actually just yesterday, a mother was speaking to me. I was actually out in a rural centre in Australia. I was delivering a first aid course to the community in Shepparton. And a mother came up and explained to me that there's been a recent death of a 10-year-old boy from a quad bike accident. And, this is actually something, that's we know in healthcare, quad bikes in particular, really dangerous on farms. A vehicle that farmers need for a certain type of things that they're doing. Like, it's really versatile. It can get into smaller places, but it also has a really low center of gravity, so it tips over really easily. So if you've got a child operating it, you can see that they could really lose control of that, and if it fell on them, it causes life-threatening injuries, if not death. So whenever I hear of things like that, and I think of, that's a preventable death, that is something that could be prevented through different management strategies and awareness, so there's certainly situations like that. And then, there's also situations where, parents being able to, I think, trust their instincts, because a lot of the time, we might have a child who's really sick, and they've said, I thought they were really unwell, and I kept going back to the doctor, and they kept telling me it was fine, but I knew that something was wrong. And so I think, some of the work that we do with parents is around helping them form those instincts into the patterns and communicate that in a way that's received by healthcare professionals in a meaningful way. Because sometimes it's about what we're saying and what we're as a parent, they're seeing the pattern, they're seeing the change in their child's behaviour, and that's information that's important to them, and then that needs to be communicated in a certain way to healthcare professionals for them to listen and go, yes, this is serious and we need to do further investigation. So, I think it's that as well that we're trying to bridge a gap, between, we're mothers, so we know what that's like with our children, and we're also, we're clinicians, so we also know what it's like in terms of how we communicate.
Yeah. And is there anything that you can tell me that's quite exciting about what you're doing at the moment within PEDS? And what's your overall, I guess, goal for the future with this business, whether it's the growth or whether it's the reach, and whether it's the education, staffing, what's kind of the idea behind moving forward future-wise? Because obviously you'd have started this during COVID or just before?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, we pretty much have started it during COVID. So we had the concept before, but, it had sort of tried to hit our stride and then COVID hit. So, look, I think the last year has been, so I do this with my colleague Sarah, so she's my co-director, and she's also a paediatric intensive care nurse. And I think she and I have really figured out who we are in this last year. So it's really been about, like, who really are we? We know that we're about pediatrics and we're about health outcomes, but, what does that mean for us? Because there's obviously other people out there who are providing, baby and child first aid courses, who are providing education, but what have we got, that's different? So I think we've really formulated that now and solidified that. So now that we've got that that awareness ourselves, we're really trying to promote, I think, in rural and regional areas, that sort of health promotion, because we know that children who are in those areas have got like almost twice as high mortality rate than metropolitan children. So we definitely want to focus in on that area. And the other thing that we really want to focus in on is children who've got comorbidities. So we're doing a lot of training for carers who look after children in their homes who might have, advanced medical needs. So they might have a tracheostomy, they might be peg fed, on oxygen, being able to give them really great training skills and knowledge so that the parents can feel that they can go have a shower, they can go to the supermarket, they can go out for dinner, and they know that someone's looking after their child, who's got a really good, strong level of training and will be able to recognise and respond to anything that might happen, whilst they're in their care, and keep them really safe. I think we're really going to focus in on those areas and try and grow those areas. And I think brand awareness is probably our thing that we need to think about now, just letting people know that we exist and this is what we do. Yeah.
And in terms of brand awareness, what is it that you're doing at the moment? Do you have someone working for you within marketing or someone within social media?
It's literally me and Sarah. We've brought this business has like come off the smell of an oily rag. Like it literally has just been me and her working really hard.
Yeah.
And no, we don't employ anybody. Like it's just me and her, like Googling, YouTubing, whatever we can to learn what we can.
Yeah.
Look, I hope one day that we have a budget to be able to do those sort of things. But at the moment, we are literally just pounding the pavement. We're talking to people, we're meeting people, just trying to raise awareness about who we are and, get on the radar so that, if someone's like, want to learn more about how to manage a certain thing. I know PEDS exists and they can, they can provide that service. I think that's probably where we're going to focus in on now, because I think we're really happy with what we've got and what we offer. But people don't really know about us.
Just to touch on what you offer, because I want people just to know exactly what that is. What kind of things do you offer when it comes to the education part of your business that's, I guess, different to what's out there in terms of first aid and stuff like that?
Yeah, well, I think the main thing is that we're really paediatric focused. So we can provide, like, for workplaces who look after children, we can provide a really paediatric focused first aid course for them. So, the usual first aid courses that you get are very adult focused, but we can come in and give you that paediatric background. If you're a parent or a carer of a child, we can give like a basic baby and child first aid course, like what's normal, what's not, how to manage accidents, illnesses and injuries. But then if you've got a child with complex medical needs, we can deal with that as well. Like, so if you find out that you're pregnant with a child who's got a congenital heart defect and you want to know what you need to know for them, then we have, we've got the background to be able to come in and really confidently answer all your questions, and manage that really, really capably. And then our third layer, I suppose, on that is then, also training for people who are then caring for children with those complex medical needs in the home. So, you're taking your child home from hospital now, they were born a little bit premature and they're coming home on oxygen, and you want your sister to be able to look after them, but she doesn't know anything about it because, she hasn't been able to be there for the training in the hospital. We can come in and fill that gap. So we can come in and give your sister the training that they need so that they can become a carer for your child. So we're trying to, I suppose, fill in those gaps that, exist, between the hospital and the home for a lot of people. Yeah.
That's amazing. That's incredible.
It feels good. It feels good doing it. Like, I think, we get a lot of that we feel like we're doing something really important here. So yeah,
you are for
it
sure.
obviously has to motivate us because
I imagine it does take a lot of motivation to keep going, especially when for some reason when it's children, there's always that heightened level of emotion, even if the child isn't yours, because they're just so young, they're so unaware of the world. So everything, I imagine, because I'm not doing what you're doing, but I imagine every single person that you speak to, every single job that you do within this realm, it always feels probably quite personal to you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's always that element of like, we're always like, Sarah and I are both mothers, and we're always going to have that. So yes, there's two worlds that we live in, I suppose. Yeah.
So we've obviously know that you're a busy lady, and you also have a not-for-profit called the Sisterhood Project, and this is with your sister, isn't it?
Yeah. So it's still it's in a startup phase. So it's something that came out of, I suppose, this work that I started doing, which was just a realization that the people who can access our services at the moment either need to do that from their own pocket, or if they've got NDIS funding, then that obviously would support them to access it as well.
Yeah.
So if we've got this grand plan to improve outcomes for everybody, all children. So how do we get to people who don't have money, who are socially disadvantaged and can't, even afford, they don't have cars, or they can't even afford to get on a bus. These are barriers for people to access this. So how do we meet those barriers and address them? And so, I approached my sister, who's in communications, who said that she always wanted to work for a not-for-profit. I'm like, hey, well, why don't we start one, and then you can work for that. So, so yes, the idea is that, the Sisterhood Project will apply for grants so that we can then fund places for, parents who come from, socially disadvantaged backgrounds to attend courses, which won't necessarily be with our business. It could be with anybody who's prepared to partner with the Sisterhood Project. So anybody who's delivering these courses could be, asked to do it, because we, as I said, we would like to get as many people as possible. So, so we've just gone through the process of incorporating. So it's learning a whole new language. Starting up a not-for-profit is very different to starting up a business, I have learned. We've gone through that process. So once that's all finalised, we can then apply to be a charity, and we can then apply for grants. So, hopefully within the next, 6 months, that will be like a fully fledged not-for-profit, and we'll be able to, start, doing some of those things that we want to do in that space as well. Yeah.
So within the next 6 months, potentially, of this becoming a fully fledged project, what's probably the main thing that you're going to need moving forward besides money?
It probably just comes back to awareness again, people just knowing that we exist and that we're out there, because, it's through that network and connections that, a lot of things evolve and take place. So, I think our biggest barrier will be, I don't actually think our money will be our barrier. I think once we become a charity, we'll be able to apply for grants. And I think, I truly believe this is a noble cause. So I think that will translate. But I think, engaging in this, in this particular community will be our challenge. When we're dealing with vulnerable populations, we have to do that in a really sensitive way. So how we do that, I think that will be our challenge. So I think probably partnering with, groups that who are already supporting them, and trying to figure out a way that we can then, capture people who have got an interest to coming along to courses, and then enable that in a way that removes a lot of those financial barriers for them. That'll be our next thing that we need to unpick and really figure out. But I think it's possible. We just got to, put some time and effort into it. Yeah.
100%. And where can people find the Sisterhood Project? I'm going to add the information on the podcast, but I just want you to let us know as well.
Awesome. Yeah, well, we're mainly just on socials at the moment. We haven't quite got a web page up, but hopefully eventually we will. So on Instagram, it's the.sisterhood project. And then on Facebook, it's the.sisterhood project 22. So, so that's mainly where we sort of updating people on where we're at in terms of our journey to becoming a not-for-profit. Hopefully the web page at some point. But we've got my brother-in-law working on that on a volunteer basis. So whenever he manages to to finish
Love
it. Yeah.
We're almost done, so I've just got 2 more questions. So one is, what are your hopes for the future of healthcare?
Future for healthcare.
Very wide question.
It is a bit wide. Look, it probably just aligns with what we're currently doing at the moment, though. Like, I think that, traditionally, it's been very centralized, so you go to a place to receive your healthcare, to get treatment. And I think that we can push it out and push it back a little bit more. And, as like sort of what we're doing with PEDS is empowering people to have a lot more ownership over, what they do from a prevention standpoint, and also addressing, their healthcare needs earlier and knowing the right way to do that. So, some of that we're trying to deal with in this space, but, other areas that could be, helping is, around health advocacy, around how people access the system and understand the system and how it works, so that you don't have people falling through the gaps, and you don't have, people unaware of what their rights are, and, how best to seek help when they're, experiencing health issues. Like, I think that, we can empower people to take a lot more ownership over their own health, and, that would make a huge difference on the healthcare system, even just reducing the burden on it, which is then going to obviously improve it, overall anyway. Yeah.
I completely agree. I think that seems to be also another thing a lot of healthcare professionals have been saying, that we need people to start taking more onus on their own health, because then that will inadvertently take the pressure off, I guess, the frontline workers. And I think that's actually becoming more of a thing now. I think a lot more people are doing a lot more research into their bodies and their health and what they're actually eating. And when they feel if they feel a little bit lethargic on a Monday, they're starting to look and think, okay, what did I eat yesterday or the day before that may have possibly led me to feel like this today? So I think there is that level of awareness that is slowly starting to build up, but there is a need for it to probably go a little bit faster, because as we all know, that the frontline workers in healthcare in general is quite stretched, and that seems to be quite a thing in many different countries. It's like this here, it's like that in the UK, it's like that in the States as well. So I think all healthcare workers have that exact same hope, I guess, which is good that we're all aligned in some way. And then just to finish off, could you give me 3 tips for someone who may be interested in taking a similar route to you within healthcare as a nurse?
Look, probably my first one would just be, remain open to the opportunities that get presented to you. Like, don't automatically shut something down because you hadn't considered it before, because you never know, it might lead you to the exact right place where you're meant to be. And then, and challenge yourself. Like, so be prepared to get out of where you feel comfortable, where you think you're meant to be. So acknowledging that sometimes you might step into roles that you don't feel like you're fully equipped for, but acknowledging your strengths and weaknesses, and, communicating what you can and can't do can sometimes be part of the learning process for you to be able to fulfill that role. And probably my last tip is just, listen to your instinct in terms of like how comfortable you feel doing something. Like if you've set in your mind up something that you expected you were going to be doing, and then you go into that area and you go, no, this doesn't feel right, I'm not happy here, then, listen to that as well. Like, it's not all over. Nursing is such a varied profession. There are so many different, subspecialties and specialties to, explore and grow from. So don't feel like just because you were convinced you're going to be a psych nurse that, when you went and did that rotation and it didn't work out, that's, game over for you, because there's so many different things you can do. Look, I'm married to a nurse as well, and he's ended up in the emergency department, after many different rotations through lots of varieties of different places. So so he didn't find his niche straight away like me. Like, he spent several years going through many different wards and specialties. So don't pigeonhole yourself either. Those probably be my top 3 tips.
Perfect. Well, thank you very, very, very much, Grace, for that interview. That was amazing. The work that you're doing with peds and also within Medcast as well is something to be looked at very, very fondly. You've found a gap within the space in healthcare that needs to be looked at, and I can tell by how you speak about it and how you come across in camera that there is a crazy passion there for it. But I just want to say thank you very much for sitting down with us today and for giving us some of your time from your busy schedule.
Oh, thanks so much for having me and letting me go on and on.
Thank you.